Hello everyone, my name is Clentus and welcome to the Iron Bars, my true crime YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's get into today's story, and it is a story about a quiet devil, also known as the Nazareth serial killer, Lazarus Mazingane. So as per usual, I got into this rabbit hole trying to dig for Lazarus Mazingane's date of birth. Unfortunately, I could not find his exact date of birth, though there are conflicting information around this, because one report will say he was born in 1973 and the other one will say he was born in 1976. So I'm not quite sure which is which. However, though, when it comes to his zodiac sign, he gives me a Gemini vibe. So when Lazarus Mazingane's mother, Macy, when she was pregnant with him, she got arrested for possession of drugs and also for prostitution. His mother would be prosecuted and convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. So while she was serving her 5-year prison term, she gave birth to Lazarus in prison. And this resulted with Lazarus hating his mother for bringing such shame to his name, because everybody in the neighborhood of Brits in the Northwest Province knew that he was born in prison to a mother who was a druggie and a prostitute. So rumors had it that she was impregnated by one of her customers while she was prostituting on the streets of Johannesburg. And this rumor will be Lazarus's birthmark, because as a result of that, he became a recluse. He was a little boy that was always on his own. He was afraid to make friends because whenever he made friends, they always brought up the fact that he was born in prison to a prostitute. Oh, by the way, immediately when he was born, his grandmother took over and brought him up. Even though the grandmother was a very strict woman, she will always give him a hiding, even for the littlest things. And she always said she was trying to bring up a responsible young man. After 5 years of serving her prison term, she returned home to Brits. However, though, as I've mentioned before, Lazarus loathed his mother. And his mother also made it public that the feeling was mutual. So this kind of like confirms the rumors that she was knocked up by a client on the streets of Johannesburg. Her hatred for her son also led her into physically abusing him, calling him all sorts of names, verbally screaming at him for absolutely no reason, and Lazarus hated that. He loathed his mother so much so that he would tell her straight on her face who she was and how embarrassing she is, and she hates the fact that it is not his grandmother who is his mother, but to a woman who is nothing to his life. So his hatred for women would translate in how he treated women going forward in his life. And he developed a strong sense of hate for a particular woman. And we will find out the type of women later in this video, because they play a very significant role as to why he became a serial killer. So when Lazarus Mazingane turned high school age, his grandmother and his mother decided to move from Brits, which is in the Northwest Province of South Africa, to a township called Soweto. They moved in a section of Soweto called Diepkloof Extension 4. There, Lazarus was very happy because he knew that nobody knew him and knew of his background. And as a result, he started opening up just a little bit, even though some kids in the neighborhood would refer to him a little bit weird because he was quiet, he was into himself, and he hardly ever came out. The only time people saw Lazarus was when he went to the shop to buy bread, or maybe when he was going to school. So the kids in Diepkloof kind of like called him a loner or a recluse. In Zulu, you would say inkomedla yodwa. So though Lazarus was a little bit into himself, like I said, when he moved into Diepkloof, nobody knew him. No one knew of his background. And as a result, he started opening up a little bit. And that led to him making a friend, somebody that he considered as his best friend. And this was Lazarus' first best friend. However, Lazarus' mother was not happy with the type of friend that Lazarus made. For some reason, she had this strong sense that this boy was nothing but trouble, and he was going to introduce her son to a life that will turn him into something else. And so she tried to speak to him against making friends with such a boy. Lazarus would not hear of it, so his mother would say, "Listen, I come from the streets, I know boys like this, and they are no good news." Lo and behold, Lazarus's best friend used to take alcohol while he was still in high school. He smoked cigarettes and also was involved with a very dangerous gang known in Soweto that hijacked cars and also would steal from people, mug people, and cause all kinds of havoc in the township. But Lazarus seemed to be unfazed, and also he seemed to kind of like enjoy being around this boy because he was fascinated with the life that he was leading. Every time the boy tried to give him a cigarette, he will say no. Every time they will give him alcohol, he will also say no. The reason why he hated cigarettes and alcohol is because his mother took alcohol as well as smoked, and so he associated these two items as something that he loathed together with his mother. And he will also grow to hating women that smoked and drank alcohol. So when Lazarus was well settled in Diepkloof, and he was also kind of like enjoying school for the first time, and he's in high school at this point, he would meet and fall in love with a girl called Nompi. Lazarus and Nompi were known to be the it couple in Diepkloof because everywhere he was, there she was. Wherever she was, there he was. So it was kind of like a very beautiful thing, kind of like couple goals type of relationship that everybody aspired to have because they seemed to love each other so very much. And other girls as well would want Lazarus to be their boyfriend because of the way he was treating Nompi in a kind, loving manner. Up until Lazarus married Nompi, and that is when all hell broke loose for Nompi because Lazarus will beat her to a pulp for absolutely no reason. And every time he would beat Nompi near death, he will always bring her flowers and apologize and say, I will not do this again. Please forgive me. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that kind of man. You know me. I love you. And she would take him back. To his friends, Lazarus was clean, intelligent, well-kept, and he always was a kind man. Even the teachers at school felt that he was a good boy that all boys should be like. So when Lazarus graduated from high school, he got himself a job as a taxi driver. However, though, when he got this job, he did not have a driver's license. And every time when he was stopped by the Metro Police asking for his driver's license, the owner of the taxi would be the one that got the tickets. So the taxi owner was like, you know what, I have to let you go until you get yourself a driver's license. I am tired of paying the city for you not having a driver's license every time you are stopped by the police. So if you don't know what a taxi driver is, in South Africa we have a different mode of transport, which we have like minibus combis or minibus taxis. If you come to South Africa, or if you will ever visit South Africa, you will see that type of mode of transport. It is usually used by the majority of the South African population. They are faster, they are cheaper, and also convenient for the public to use. However, though, when you are here in South Africa, they are the bosses of the road. Even the traffic cops are kind of like afraid of them. And South African drivers hate them. Lazarus's boss, the taxi owner, used to describe Lazarus as quiet, well-behaved, a gentleman, always clean, and he always brought the taxi back. So in the mid-1990s, South Africa was experiencing the dawn of democracy. This is where apartheid was actually coming to an end, and on the 27th of April 1994, the dawn of democracy came to reality, and we had a new government, and South Africa became a constitutional democracy. So while South Africa was celebrating this new life and South Africa being reborn, many people would leave their township, their villages and cities, going to big cities like Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town and Bloemfontein, looking for greener pastures. However, though, at the same time, South Africa will be hit by a spat of serial killers. Some of them, I have covered them in this very channel, like your Moses Sithole, who would prey on women that were looking for work, and he would pretend to be a company owner looking for women to come and work either as a secretary or as a cleaner. And if he found a desperate woman, he would then walk with them into a veld where he would grape them and strangle them with their own pieces of clothes. And Lazarus Mazingane was no different from Moses Sithole, so brace yourself. In this video, I must warn you though, there is a lot of graphic description of things that were done to these women. So if you are sensitive to such information, please do click off from here. You can watch another video of mine when I upload next week. So when Lazarus's relationship with his best friend, he became a nasty piece of work. So Lazarus Mazingane started a life of crime immediately when he was laid off by his taxi boss. And guess who he teamed up with? His best friend by the name of Kaiser. Like I mentioned earlier, Kaiser was a part of a gang that was terrorizing the communities of Diepkloof, and they were well-known criminals, and now Lazarus Mazingane is now part of them. They would go break into people's houses, steal things, even hijacking cars. However, as Lazarus was growing a little bit older, he became very tired of the lifestyle that he was leading. So he decided that he'll become an upstanding member of society by looking for another job. And this is where he met a couple that took him in a South township called Orange Farm, which is about 40 kilometers away from Soweto. So when this couple took Lazarus in, they provided him a job as well as roof over his head and also treated him like one of their own. However, the job did not pay as much as Lazarus would have liked. So he was like, okay, fine, I will continue working for this couple because he also liked them and they also loved him like a son. This frustrated Lazarus a lot because he would not have enough money. The reason why Lazarus was not always having enough money, it is because he was cheating on his wife Nombi. And so the women that he was cheating with, they always wanted one thing or another. He even had a girlfriend in Orange Farm that he impregnated. Or so he thought. Now, out of the blue, Lazarus disappeared from Orange Farm. He basically upped and left, didn't tell this couple where he was going to, but he would come now and again to say hello to the family, and he would also go and visit his girlfriend who was pregnant. Unfortunately, this girl that he was cheating with, her name was Elizabeth, she too endured beatings to a pulp, and he would do exactly what he would do with Nombi. He would go and apologize, crying tears, asking for forgiveness, and spoiling her with things that she loved, like chocolate and also cold drink and things like that. And he would do it again over and over and over. Lazarus would even kick Elizabeth on her stomach, even though he knew she was carrying a baby. Now, it's not clear whether this baby was born or not. So Lazarus would say that the reason why he beat Elizabeth is because she cheated on him. She would cheat on him with many men. And I asked myself this question: you are married and you are cheating. Okay, whatever. So this one particular Sunday when he had gone to visit Elizabeth in Orange Farm, she was not at home, and this made him a little bit angry, and so he went out looking for her, and he found her. He found her in a house with another man. Basically, they were just chilling, watching television, not doing anything suspicious. This is when Lazarus pulled her out of the house, beating her up while going home and asking her, what were you doing with that man? And she kept telling him, listen, this guy is my friend. I was bored at home and I was not even sure if you were coming today. He's like, you know that I come once in a blue moon, and when I come, I need to find you here. You are carrying my child. And he would beat her up and kick her in the stomach. So because she was getting accused of cheating, one of the days when Lazarus came to visit her, he found out that she had hickeys all over her neck. And that is when he was like, I don't give hickeys. What is going on your neck? And she said, mind your own business. At this point, Elizabeth had had enough with Lazarus, and she wanted him out of her life. Lazarus said all he could see was nothing but darkness because he blacked out. And when he came to, he found that he had beaten Elizabeth half to death. When Elizabeth came to, she ran out and went straight to her mother's house. Of course, Elizabeth's mother was furious. She was so furious that she went to Lazarus to confront him. When she got there, she told him everything that he did not want to hear. She called him names. The first thing that she called him was impotent and infertile, and that the child that Elizabeth was carrying was not even his. The child belonged to the man that Lazarus found Elizabeth in the house with, and that is the father of the child, not you, because you are infertile. Come to think of it, Elizabeth and Nombi never had a baby. So anyways, I digress. And Lazarus said, as Elizabeth's mother was going on at him, embarrassing him in front of everybody, he pulled out a gun because he blacked out. All he remembers is that he pumped 9 bullets into her body. Miraculously, Elizabeth's mother would survive. Lazarus said the reason why he blacked out is because Elizabeth's mother reminded him of his grandmother and his mother, shouting, screaming, calling, abusing him verbally, and also he was afraid that this woman was going to come closer to him and begin to beat him. So basically, he was triggered by Elizabeth's mother shouting at him, embarrassing him in front of everybody. That resulted with him blacking out, pulling out a gun, and basically pumping every bullet he had in the gun chamber. Is it chamber? And here's the interesting part. Lazarus was arrested, prosecuted, and even convicted for shooting Elizabeth's mother. However, when I tried to look deeper into this case, I could not find any information whether he was sentenced, and if he was sentenced, how many years did he spend in prison. Such information does not exist. If I use my 2 IQs, I would say that he ran away from justice. Basically, he became a flight risk and he never returned to court. Now, why justice did not go after him, I'm not quite sure. However, I think because South Africa just entered a new dawn of democracy and the police system and the court systems were basically being revamped or something like that to fit and suit the new constitutional democracy, he may have fallen through the cracks. And as a result, he became a free man for some reason. And also, let's not forget that the police had their hands full with 3 serial killers on the loose around 1995 to about 2001. So on the 13th of April 1993, the couple that had employed Lazarus, their home was on fire, and Lazarus happened to be in the area when he saw the house of his favorite people burning down. He said he ran there to try and put out the fire. He says that as he was going to the house, he saw the husband, who was not touched by anything, running away from the burning house. However, though, he and the husband had a short conversation. He told Lazarus that a fuse of some sort burst and his wife is inside the house. So he's not sure if she will be able to survive this one. So Lazarus told the husband, don't worry, we will try and rescue her. So he went into the house trying to rescue this woman. However, the story is, remember I told you that Lazarus kind of like up and left suddenly in Orange Farm? Turns out that Lazarus, because he was frustrated with the salary, he tried to confront both the husband and wife to tell them that, listen, I am not satisfied with the amount of money you are paying me. So basically, the wife had told Lazarus that he is ungrateful because they have provided a roof over his head, they feed him, they clothe him, and they also give him some few other things that he may need, as any parent would do. So why would he now want more? So this kind of like made Lazarus very angry. He saw an iron bar and he hit the woman on the head. She fell to the ground. The husband, being afraid that he would be attacked next, he ran out. And as the husband ran out, he then collected this woman who was on the ground. He thought she was dead. He basically took her, dragged her to a burning heater and laid her body and then doused her with paraffin. So at some point, the paraffin caught fire, and this is how the house basically burned down with the woman inside. And my question is, why didn't the husband call the police on Lazarus? Something about this story does not add up, because it turns out the husband was having a very serious affair with a mistress that he had fallen in love with. And immediately after the wife was buried, he married her. So 2 years after the death of this woman in the burning house, Lazarus would become known as the Nazareth serial killer. And he started a reign of terror between 1995 to 1998. And this is how it began. So after the death of this woman, he decided that he was going to take himself to a driving school so he can attain his driver's license. So when he obtained his driver's license, he decided to go back to becoming a taxi driver. So he went back to his boss, his old boss basically, and asked for his job back. He basically gave the taxi owner his driver's license as proof that he's now compliant on the road. Of course, his old boss was very happy to see Lazarus back and basically gave him back his job. So this time around, when Lazarus became a taxi driver once more, his route was between the city of Johannesburg, Nazareth, and Soweto. And if you know anything about Soweto, it is South Africa's largest township, and therefore that route was the busiest in South Africa. This is 1995 all the way till probably today. So Lazarus, once again, when he got back his taxi, he decorated his taxi with a pair of women's underwear that was hung in the rear view mirror. This made some passengers a little offended or not happy at all, but he did not care. For him, he liked seeing a woman's underwear hanging in the rearview mirror. Unfortunately, his job will also become a platform that made him into a serial killer. So let's talk about the type of women that he loathed. He said that he hated women that were loud, women that shouted, women that were uncultured, smoked, and women that mistreated men. He felt that a woman should always respect a man. It's not surprising coming from a man who is abusive to women, a man who almost kills women half to death whenever he beats them. So it's kind of like fat coming from him. So one thing that you are going to experience in one of these taxis here in South Africa is that sometimes it can get a little rowdy. People are talking, they're having conversations, some are gossiping, some are talking about the news bulletin they watched last night, and some women are basically shouting whenever the driver is slow because they are going to work or returning from work. He said that some women would shout at him whenever he drove slowly, and they would shout at him, telling him, "Drive faster, I'm already late for work," and he hated that. He said these women reminded him of his mother and grandmother. Basically, when they start shouting, he would get triggered, and that would make him to black out and want to strangle these women. So when this shouting was happening every single day, this brought Lazarus to a point where he had had enough. This is when all hell broke loose. On the 6th of March in 1996, a 24-year-old Dineo Molo disappeared for 3 days. Dineo's body would be discovered not too far from Nazareth. Dineo's autopsy showed that she was beaten, she was raped, she was also strangled with a piece of her own clothing. On the 7th of March 1995, a body of an unidentified woman would be found on corner of Nazareth and Sports Road. She too was raped, beaten, and also strangled with a piece of her own clothing. The rest of 1995, the killer seemed to have gone quiet. However, on the 10th of March 1996, Lindelani Mahlangu would be reported missing by her children. 32-year-old Lindelani Mahlangu's body would be discovered in Nazareth. Autopsy showed that Lindelani Mahlangu was beaten, raped, and suffocated with a plastic bag that covered her head. On the 1st of May 1996, the body of a 19-year-old Katrina Mayebe would be found. And this time he had made a killing in an old suburbs called Rudaport. Just as the police hands were full with Katrina's murder, they hear of another discovery that was made in Nazareth. The body of Gladys Mabaso would be found in Naturena. She too was raped, beaten, and strangled with a belt. On the 2nd of May 1996, the body of Queen Mnguni would be found in New Canada Road in Soweto. She too was beaten, raped, and strangled. It sure took the police long enough to realize that they had a serial killer on their hands. However, though, the police caught on and realized that they have a serial killer on the loose, the fourth one. So this is what the police said when they realized that they had a serial killer on the loose. Let me quote them. The police noticed that the serial killer had a very clear modus operandi. He forced himself on his victims, beat them, and strangled them with their own pieces of clothing and dumped them in the same area or nearby area. And the other thing that they noticed about the serial killer's knot whenever he strangled these women with their pieces of clothing is that, let me read it again. The knot would have a double loop around the victim's neck. This unique knot would be called the Lazarus Mazingane knot. So when the news broke, 6 women were already murdered by this serial killer. And the police warned women in Soweto, Nazareth, Omonde, and Naturena to be on the lookout, especially for anybody that tries to offer them a job. At this point in time, the police were not clear what method he used to lure these women. So they thought because Moses Sithole was luring women with a promise of a job, probably the new serial killer was also doing the same thing, kind of like a copycat serial killer. The women in all these places were up in arms. They wanted the police to find this man because they were now afraid to leave their homes to look for work or go to work, and they were also afraid for their girl children. Many women asked why did the death penalty was abolished. Actually, the death penalty was abolished in 1995. That's because the previous year, the South African Constitutional Court would hear and decide on a landmark case called the State versus Makonyane. The court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional, therefore abolishing the death penalty in South Africa. So the pressure was mounting on the police to find this serial killer because things were getting out of hand. Even the Minister of Safety and Security at the time was up in arms wanting a solution to this problem. Even Nelson Mandela, who was the president of the Republic of South Africa, also expressed his own concern. And this is when the police brought in an A-lister investigator called Piet Belleveld. Piet Belleveld's hands was already full with the investigation of Moses Sithole, whom he was very close to catching. He also had 2 other serial killers that he needed to catch. And now Lazarus Mazingane was the 4th that he needed to catch. When Piet Belleveld took over Lazarus Mazingane's case, everybody was a little bit relieved because they knew that he was going to catch whoever this serial killer was. However, when Piet Belleveld was looking through the dockets that were handed over to him, he was livid to discover that the police who were investigating the case of this Nazareth killer, they have shown all their cards in public, basically telling the serial killer that this is the type of person they are looking for, and these are the things that he does, and these are the kind of knots that he ties around his victims. And so he said this was too much information, that the serial killer was going to now change his modus operandi and basically throw the police off on their investigations. So he was livid that the police were careless with this information by publishing it to the public. Despite all the reporting that Lazarus was watching on the news, he continued killing women. On the 6th of May 1996, the body of Rose Vilakazi would be discovered in Nazareth. And this time around, Lazarus would beat his victim, he would strangle them, and then he would take their underwear and shove them down their throat, which kind of like suffocated them, and he would leave them there. Or he also raped them. On the 22nd of May 1996, the body of Mainam Simanga would be found in Everton. She too suffered the same fate and the same method of murder. On the 6th of June 1996, 16-year-old Prudence Momane's body would be discovered along the N1 highway in Soweto. Unfortunately, this would be the serial killer's youngest victim. Just like Rose, she was beaten, raped, and strangled with a piece of her underwear, which was later shoved down her throat. On the 11th of July 1996, Maria Shabalala would also suffer the same fate as Prudence and the previous women. Maria's body would be discovered along the Golden Highway, which was about 30 minutes away from his usual killing in Nazareth. On the 16th of November 1996, the body of Dora would be discovered along the M2 West near the Crown Mines. She too was raped, beaten, and strangled with her underwear that was shoved down her throat. So in 1997, the serial killer seemed to have stopped killing because nothing happened during 1997. Or so we think. On the 27th of February 1998, the body of Palisa Mulipi would be found in the township of Soweto called Meadowlands. Lazarus Mazingane's MO continued to being the same. Beat the women, rape them, strangle them with a piece of their own clothing, and dump their bodies in an intersection so that people can discover the body. Interestingly, every night when he went home, he would watch the news and he would hear about the serial killer on the loose in Nazareth, and he would tell his wife Nombi that this is very frustrating. Why the police were not catching the serial killer? Because he's about to kill again. Of course, Nombi was like, I'm not quite sure. It's seemingly the police are very busy because there are other serial killers on the loose. But Lazarus would tell Nombi that this man is killing again tomorrow. And this time around, he will kill more than one woman a day. On the 23rd of April 1998, Susan Mlaba's body would be discovered in Mzumhlope Women's Hostel in Soweto. She too was beaten, raped, and strangled. But this time around, Lazarus went back to his old MO by just strangling them with a piece of their own clothing. And this is when Big Belafelt was like, yes, here we have the same person that is killing all these women because of the evidence he had on his hand. He said this killer would beat the women and strangle them with a piece of their own clothing using a unique knot, which we now know as the Mazingane knot. Though DNA was still at its infancy around the 1990s, Big Belafelt made sure that the police, whenever they collected evidence, that they also collected semen. So that at some point when the DNA thing starts developing, they would use it to match the DNA they collected on the scene with that of the person when he is caught. So just as the police's hands were full investigating the serial killer, 2 of the serial killers that were on the loose were already caught. 2 were still on the loose, and one of them was Lazarus Mazingane. When suddenly a spate of hijackings were reported along the M1 and the M12 in Johannesburg. So this was the modus operandi of the hijackers. They basically took rocks big enough for a car. If they tried to run over them, the car would get damaged or the tires would puncture. So they would lay these rocks across the road that the driver would stop before hitting these rocks so that he can remove them and then drive through. And when the driver stopped, this is when the hijackers would spring up from nowhere and offer to help. This is when they would basically take out the weapons. That is when they would take out their weapons and then basically take the car away. On the 16th of June 1997, a couple was coming from a relaxed day. On the 16th of June, by the way, in South Africa, it is a public holiday called Youth Day. This is in commemoration of the 1976 June 16, where the apartheid government shot and killed some students who were protesting against being taught in Afrikaans. So this couple and their baby were coming back from relaxing at Hartbeespoort Dam and they were headed home. When they came across rocks that were laid across the road, the husband got out of the car to try and remove them so he can pass when out of the blue, a man came up behind him and offered to assist him. When he said, no, it's okay, this is when he took out a gun and said, get into the car and sit on top of your wife while the hijacker drove with them. The baby woke up and realized that the parents were kind of like crying. The baby started screaming as well. And this hijacker couldn't care less. When they got to a secluded area, this is when he ordered them out, told the husband to lie on his belly while he dragged the woman and he basically raped her. After he was done raping her, he took her back to the husband, and the baby was still screaming in the vehicle because it was in the baby seat. And then he told them, listen, I'm going to let you go, but if you ever go to the police, I will find you and I will murder you. I have killed people before. He took out the baby out of the baby seat and gave the baby to them, and he drove off. The moment that the couple got an opportunity to go to the police station, they went and reported this incident. So at the police station, the police collected DNA evidence from the victim. And at this time, DNA testing was now starting to develop into something. So they took the semen from the latest victim, they matched it with the other DNAs that they have collected, and guess what? It comes from the same perpetrator. Meaning that when in 1997 everybody thought that the serial killer had gone quiet, actually he had changed his MO. He was now hijacking cars. On the 24th of July 1997, 66-year-old Harold and his 62-year-old wife Elsie were driving along the N12 when they came across these rocks that were laid across the road. Harold decided to drive over these rocks. However, his car got damaged and one of the tires also punctured. And when he got out of the vehicle to investigate the damage, this is when a young man sprang up from nowhere, offered to help. But Harold politely said, no, I'm okay. And this is when this young man pulled out a gun and basically shot Harold execution style and then got into the vehicle without realizing that Elsie is actually disabled. He drove with her and then picked up his accomplice along the way, and they drove Elsie to a maize field where they told her to get out but she could not get out because she is disabled. So they carried her out of the vehicle, and basically the man that had killed her husband tried to grape her, but she asked him not to because of her condition. For some reason, the rapist decided, okay, fine. They just left Elsie there where she spent the entire afternoon and the entire night in the maize field by herself in the cold, because in July, this is the thick of winter in South Africa. So the following day at midday, Elsie would be discovered by a tractor driver who was shocked to see this poor woman who was exhausted, dehydrated, and also in terrible pain and was in a terrible condition. Basically, this is a woman who witnessed her husband shot dead and also almost raped. The N4 and the N12 would be known as the hijacking hotspot, and all drivers were warned not to drive on those roads during off-peak time and when it's dark outside. However, this did not stop the hijackers because they continued to do this for years. Pete Bellefeld was very frustrated by the Nazareth serial killer because he seemed to be steps ahead of him, and he knew why the serial killer was ahead of him, because the investigating police were very careless with the information that they had published. So this is when Pete Bellefeld had come up with an idea. He thought, listen, definitely somewhere out there are survivors of the Nazareth serial killer, and so he needed to find them. So he basically started calling all police stations around Johannesburg, basically asking if any victim had come to the police station to report a hijacking or survive some kind of attack, and if there were, he wanted to know if these victims described the perpetrator because he wanted his identity. He also wanted victims that had come to the police station to report that they were either kidnapped, beaten, raped, and survived. In no time, 6 women came forward, and they all had the same story to tell. And each and every one of these women had the same description of a man that had done all these things to them. So when Pete Bellefeld was interviewing these survivors, he was noticing a common denominator about them: their mannerisms, the way they dressed, the way they talked, and the color of the nail polish that they wore. These women were described to be humble, respectful, intelligent, and very down to earth, and they wore long dresses and very colorful nail polish. The women described the perpetrator to be a gentleman at first. He was soft-spoken, charming, and he spoke one of the Sotho languages. Some said he definitely spoke Setswana. So as I've mentioned in my previous video, in South Africa, there are 11 official languages, and Setswana is one of the official languages in South Africa. The women said he was in his early 20s, he was clean, and very charming. These women also said he was in his early 20s, a taxi driver whose route was between the city of Johannesburg, Nazareth, and Soweto. So Pete Bellefeld now had a clear picture of who he was looking for. He was looking for a young man who is in his early 20s. He drove a taxi, and his route was between the city of Johannesburg, Nazareth, and Soweto. And he spoke Sesotho. Now, the taxi industry in South Africa, it is usually run by Zulus. So most taxis in South Africa are driven by Zulu speakers. And it is rare to find a taxi driver that spoke a different language from Zulu. Of course, this developed a certain stereotype about taxi drivers in South Africa, which exists to this very day. So these women said that they took this taxi whenever they got it. It was of this young man who was respectful, quiet, and he also seemed to be intelligent. He enjoyed talking to these women. In other words, he was grooming these women to trust him. And these women said they never suspected a thing from him. They did not know that he was a monster when he became a monster. So in most cases, he would target women that would be left alone in the taxi. So this is how the taxi works. So So when you hop onto this taxi, there is no specific stop that the taxi would stop at. So along the way, people will be dropping off, and then there will always be this last passenger in a taxi. So it so happened that most of the time it will be these women that will be the last one in the taxi for the next stop or wherever they are going to jump off. And so those are the type of women that he targeted. And he went for a specific type of woman. She needed to be humble, respectful, did not smoke or drink, because those are the questions he would ask them. And also working. Those were the women that he targeted, not the loud, the ones that shouted at him and reminded him of his mother and his grandmother. And that to me is an irony, because you would have thought he would go for those ones as revenge to what he has been put through by his mom and grandmother. So these women said when they were left alone in the taxi with the driver, he would drive to a secluded area where he would drag them out with a gun and basically grape them, beat them, and then he would leave them there for dead after he had strangled them, thinking that he had killed them. So in the early 2000s, a lawyer's wife was driving along the N12 when she came across these rocks. She decided that she was going to drive over the rocks because in her mind, she thought this is a trap of some sort. Unfortunately, just when she got under the bridge, the car tire had punctured, and so it slowed the car down. Then she got onto her mobile phone and called a friend and told the friend where exactly she was. So just as she was busy on the phone, a young man sprang up from nowhere, banged on the window and said, "Get out of the car." She refused to get out of the car. He basically forced the door open, dragged the woman out, took her into the bush, raped her, beat her, strangled her. He did not kill her. When he realized that she was not dying, he then told her, "You go to the police, I will hunt you and I will kill you." He then took off with her car. Now, because she had spoke to her friend while she was under the bridge stuck, the friend came to that location, basically took her straight to the police station where she reported the incident. The police collected DNA from her, and then in no time, the perpetrator was caught. Finally, the hijacker was caught, and that kind of like brought an end to the hijacking along the N4 and the N12. So as I've mentioned in my previous video, that in South Africa, when you get arrested, your name cannot be legally published. It's therefore, in order for your name to be legally published, you first need to greet the magistrate. So this hijacker had to spend a night in jail before he met the magistrate the following day, and his name was released, and it was Lazarus Mazingane, the Nazareth serial killer. But at this point in time, no one knew that this was the Nazareth serial killer. Lazarus Mazingane would be prosecuted and found guilty for the hijacking, rape, and assault of the lawyer's wife. And he would be sentenced to 35 years in prison. So Pete Belfeld and his crew were still busy looking for the Nazareth serial killer. He already bagged Moses Sithole, Cedric Marke, and the third serial killer, and now he was looking for the Nazareth serial killer. He didn't know that the Nazareth serial killer was already in prison, serving a 35-year prison term. And 14 months later, when he discovered that his serial killer was in jail, he was livid at the police station where Lazarus was incarcerated, asking them, "Why didn't you read the bulletin that if a person of this nature whose DNA matches all of his victims, that is the person he was looking for?" The police were like, "Well, at that time we were still basically revamping our systems, and so that kind of like fell through the cracks." But Pete Belfeld did not want to hear that excuse. However, though, he went to the prison where Lazarus Mazingane was serving at, and basically collected him from there, drove him to Brixton Murder Unit. On the way to Brixton, Lazarus was like, "Why are you taking me to the murder unit? I'm already serving a prison term." But Pete Belfeld would not say anything. He basically took him to Brixton, threw him in a prison cell, and then he left for 3 months. During the 3 months while Lazarus was there, he was an impossible prisoner. The police and the jail guards had had enough with him because he was throwing tantrums. He wanted to know what he was doing there. Now, from what I hear, Brixton Murder Unit is no child's play because it harbored like serious criminals. And most of these criminals, they would grape each other. And Lazarus hated the fact that he was being abused at this facility. So about 3 months later, Pete Belfeld went back to Brixton Murder Unit and then called for Lazarus. He then asked Lazarus, is there anything that you would like to tell me about the murders that you've been perpetrating since 1995? But Lazarus will say, I don't know what you're talking about. I have never killed anybody. I was like, no, not only just killing them. You would first beat them, rape them, strangle them, and then you would tie them with this particular knot. But Lazarus was like, no, I'm sorry, it's not me. You got the wrong man. I am serving a sentence of hijacking and raping a lawyer's wife. All this other stuff that you're telling me about, I have no idea about. This is when Pete Belfeld then threw him back into the prison, and then he left for another 3 months. Now, what forced Pete to come back was because Lazarus was becoming more and more impossible. So much so that whenever he was given food, he would defecate on the plate of food and throw it at the prison guards. This made Pete extremely angry. He went back to Brixton Murder Unit, sat Lazarus down and said, okay, if you don't want to be here, because I can keep you here for the rest of your life if I have to, you got to tell me about these murders. This is when Lazarus was like, okay, fine. I can only admit to raping these women, but murder, no. I did not murder anybody. So Pete then came with a different angle because he had used the same angle on Cedric Marquez. He then realized that Lazarus had his grandmother and mother, and so he decided to put him in a vehicle and go to Soweto to visit his grandmother and mother. When his grandmother saw him in shackles, she was distraught. She hated the fact that her grandson was in shackles, and also Lazarus looked ashamed in being in shackles. And this is when his mother said, I told you, you're gonna end up there. You were born in prison, you're gonna die in prison. Basically, that's what his mother said. The irony of it, being born in prison and then you'll be sentenced for the rest of your life and die there. I have never heard of anything like this before. But anyways, this tactic seemed to work because Lazarus became a little bit soft as they were driving back to Brixton, and he hated Brixton, and he told Pete, I hate that place. Take me back where I was serving my sentence. But Pete said, I can only take you back to your prison, to your old prison, if you told me the truth. This is when he said, okay, take me to Brixton, I will tell you everything. When they got to Brixton, this is when Lazarus basically told Pete everything. He admitted to each and every one of the crimes that he's been accused of. Of course, he was rearrested, then he was brought before the court. So Pete Belfeld wanted to know why he was killing this particular type of women. He said he wanted to preserve such women because they were nice, they were kind, they were intelligent, they wore long dresses, they didn't shout, they didn't smoke, they did not drink, they were not prostituting themselves. They were upstanding women in community, and that's the type of women that he liked and he was attracted to. And also, he loved the color of the nail polish. The brighter the nail polish, the more attracted he would be towards that woman. Again, I still don't understand. I would have thought that you would be killing the ones that reminded you of your mom and grandma. But anyways, he also told Pete Belfeld that he hated women that smoked and drank alcohol because they end up becoming prostitutes and get knocked up by these clients, and these children get born in prison like he was. So he really never forgave his mother for giving birth to him when she was in prison. In April of 2002, Lazarus's trial would begin, and over 25 witnesses would be called to the stand to testify against him. Lazarus Mazingane was charged with 75 counts of robbery, rape, assault to do grievous bodily harm, attempted murder, and 17 murders, and possession of illegal firearms and ammunition. Having confessed to Pete Belfeld about everything that he had done to those 16 women, he still pleaded not guilty. And this started a 9-month-long trial. It took the judge 4 days to deliver his judgment because the evidence that was tabled before him was so much so that it would make an archive center look like a walk in a park. After 4 days of judgment delivery, the judge found Lazarus Mazingane guilty of 74 charges of the 75. On the 2nd of December 2002, Lazarus Mazingane was sentenced to 17 life sentences and an additional 715 years in prison. So indeed, Lazarus Mazingane, born in prison, he would die in prison. So after Lazarus Mazingane was sentenced to 17 life in prison and 715 years in prison, he was like, hold on, I'm not going to go down by myself here. I had an accomplice and his name is Kaiser. This is my best friend I met in high school. But Kaiser, at this point, he was so ill with AIDS that he couldn't even stand in court. However, though, he decided to confess everything. He did admit to all the killings, the hijacking. However, though, he said he can only accept that he was a hijacker, but he did not participate in the rapes because of his ill health. He said he was in an advanced stages of AIDS. All that he could do is stand there and watch while Mazingane was busy raping these women, beating them, and doing things that he himself did not agree with. He said, please sentence me, but if you sentence me, do not take me to the same prison as Lazarus because I am afraid of him. Now, the math is not mathing here because this Kaiser guy is the same person that introduced Lazarus to a life of crime, and now he's afraid of him. I would think it will be the opposite. But anyways, that is what Kaiser said. He said he was afraid of Lazarus because he's a dangerous man. You're a dangerous man too. But anyways, so Kaiser was also sentenced to 35 years in prison for the hijacking of the lawyer's wife. Well, that is the story of the quiet devil, the Nazareth serial killer, Lazarus Mazingane. So if you like this video, give it a like. If you have not subscribed to my channel, do subscribe and don't forget to click the bell notification so that you get notified every time I upload a new true crime video. Do leave me a comment down below. I like interacting with you guys. And also, please share this video far and wide. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time with a new true crime video. Goodbye. And this is Lazarus, and this was Lazarus. And this was Lazarus's, and this was Lazarus's, is it Lazarus's? And Lazarus said, as and Lazarus said, as Elizabeth mother, no. And Lazarus said, as not Nombi, the couple that had employed, They home burned. Basically, he was telling 16-year-old Prudence Momane. 16-year-old Prudence Momane's body would be